A clerk pushes a document back across a desk. No alarms sound. No guards move. No heavy steel vault doors slam shut beneath the floor. In the silence of this wood-paneled office, the most violent act in the financial world has just occurred. A sovereign nation has been denied. The document remains on the desk. No one reaches for it. The ink is still wet enough to reflect the green-shaded lamp above. It is a signature from a central bank official. A man whose title suggests he commands billions. Yet here, his ink is just a cooling liquid on a dead piece of paper. The seal remains perfectly intact. A heavy, crimson impression of authority that has just been stripped of its meaning. Nothing about the texture of the paper suggests that it has just frozen 31 tons of national reserves. It looks like any other invoice, any other internal memo. But the weight it carries is tectonic. The room remains quiet. The gold remains underground. The distance between them is no longer measured in miles or meters, but in signatures. And 80 feet below the streets of London, 31 tons of gold become instantly inaccessible. The bars have not moved. The cage has not changed. The metal remains exactly where it was yesterday. Its atoms heavy, stable, and cold in the dark. It is as if the physical world has been disconnected from the legal world. The gold exists, but the power to move it has evaporated. How can something belong to you and still remain completely out of reach? Tonight, we are auditing the deep, structural breaking of the ultimate financial illusion. We are stepping into the final, silent corridor of institutional power, where we discover that the abstract right to own has been completely disconnected from the physical ability to touch. Welcome to the Midnight Auditor. The archive remains open. To understand why those 31 tons of wealth are currently unusable, we must leave the vaults entirely. We do not look at the guns of the perimeter guard or the biometric scanners at the gate. Instead, we look at that simple mahogany desk in the quiet room upstairs. A clerk is not verifying a deposit slip. A judge is not auditing a ledger. He is using a silver magnifying glass to examine a single line of typography on an official diplomatic registry. The observation requires no political commentary. Our eyes remain fixed on the documentation. The state has chosen to alter its recognition within the official registry of the Foreign Office. It is an administrative determination, a choice of which signature is permitted to bridge the gap between the material world and the institutional ledger. And with that single, quiet movement of a piece of paper, the physical reality of 31 tons of heavy metal is severed from the material world. The clerk turns the key. The document is locked away. Frozen in the administrative air. But our audit does not stop at the mahogany desk. We follow the phantom of that rejected order, tracking its descent through the physical architecture of the perimeter to see how a piece of paper translates into a prison for mass. The shoes move past the oil paintings of long-dead governors. Men who once believed their words were immutable laws. Then, the sound changes. Wood gives way to granite. Granite gives way to reinforced steel. The electronic system at the gate does not read the political crisis. It simply logs the lack of an authenticated clearance token. Without that token, the mechanical logic of the terminal shuts down. The system does not need to be angry. It only needs to be unresponsive. We descend. 3 flights of concrete stairs, each turn making the air noticeably cooler. Stripped of its humidity by the continuous industrial dryers. Every foot of descent is a step away from the abstract world of titles and legal fictions, pushing deeper into the brutal reality of weight. When the elevator platform reaches its terminal depth, 80 feet below the street, the gate rattles open to reveal the absolute stillness of the grid. The clerk is gone. The paintings are gone. Only the metal remains. Look at that document back on the desk. The text does not contain mathematical formulas or market risk assessments. It contains names. The ink has cured into the paper, creating an administrative pattern that the routing system upstairs no longer recognizes as a valid command. The clerk does not press an alarm. No security detail enters the room. The silence is absolute. A small clock on the mantel continues to tick, marking the passage of seconds. Yet the room remains smelling of old leather and paper dust. The ledger on the desk is heavy. Its edges are bound in reinforced buckram, designed to outlast the regimes whose signatures it contains. The clerk looks at the crimson wax seal, then turns the page. The document is no longer an order. It is an artifact of a suspended relationship. The depository bank does not claim that the gold belongs to the custodian. To do so would break the foundational myth of the global financial architecture. If the world suspected that assets were confiscated at will, the vaults beneath Threadneedle Street would empty by dawn. The system cannot survive on raw theft. It requires something far more sophisticated. The bank looks at the document, looks at the official diplomatic registry, and says, "We agree the gold is yours. We do not deny your title. We simply do not recognize the legitimacy of the hand that signed the withdrawal order." "80 feet below, the 31 tons of gold become a ghost. They occupy space. They exert mass. But they are functionally erased from the trading floor above. In the grammar of modern power, ownership is a passive, historical state. It lives in past tense receipts, archival records, and digital declarations. It is a concept designed to comfort the depositor while their assets are stored in another man's house. But access is an active, present tense permission. When the administrative curtain falls between a sovereign state and a foreign vault, the ledger remains untouched. The name of the country remains written on the plastic tag hanging from the wire cage. The balance sheet preserves the multi-billion-dollar valuation of the reserve asset. But the asset has been cast out of the system. It cannot be sold to clear an international debt. It cannot be used as collateral for an emergency loan. The nation owns the wealth on paper, but the power to move it has evaporated. The system does not need to destroy your wealth to control you. It only needs to withhold its signature from the paper that allows the metal to move. Inside the eastern corridor of the high-security storage grid, we stop before an ordinary iron rack. Bar number 8832 sits on the third shelf. Nothing about it appears unusual. No lights flash on its surface. No automated warning sounds vibrate through the reinforced concrete floor. No second physical bar materializes out of the air beside it to mark the arrival of a new legal claim. The shelf does not vibrate. The air does not change. No technician enters the corridor to acknowledge the complex financial transactions occurring in the software layers above. Look closely at the surface of the bar. Dust continues settling across the upper edge. A microscopic layer of grey that suggests absolute abandonment. It is the dust of decades. Particles of concrete, skin, and fabric that have found a permanent home on the world's most coveted substance. The inventory label, printed on a cheap thermal printer, remains attached to the rack with a piece of aging adhesive. It is slightly yellowed at the edges, beginning to curl away from the cold metal of the shelf. Everything appears permanent. Everything appears stationary. The metal remains perfectly still. The paperwork does not. Tonight, as the digital clearinghouse balances its midnight accounts in New York, London, and Tokyo, this specific bar, bearing its verified serial number and its refinery stamp, remains precisely where the warehouse technician placed it months ago. Its atoms are heavy, dense, and stationary. It rests on a cheap layer of industrial foam, completely subject to the laws of gravity and friction. And yet, somewhere tonight across 3 different time zones, 3 separate balance sheets are behaving as if it belongs to them alone. Modern finance does not require the underlying asset to multiply. It does not need to split the gold into 3 smaller pieces or clone its atomic structure. That would be crude, material, and inefficient. The system has discovered that it only requires the physical metal to do one thing: stay absolutely still. As long as bar number 8832 remains completely motionless on the 3rd shelf, as long as it never leaves the cage, never undergoes a physical audit, and never moves across the concrete floor, its financial shadow can be duplicated indefinitely across the network. A central bank in Europe logs the bar as a reserve asset. Simultaneously, a commercial bullion dealer in Manhattan uses the record of that same bar to back a liquidity line. At the exact same hour, an investment fund in Singapore records the serial number as collateral for a short-term derivative contract. A gold bar with a verified serial number sits in a vault. Yet its liquidity function is active across 3 different derivative contracts at midnight. The horror is not that the system is breaking. The horror is that it is working exactly as designed. Let us look at a specific marker in the ledger. Somewhere tonight, an official statement from a minor central bank reports its sovereign reserves to the International Monetary Fund. The asset is listed. The valuation is checked. The annual audit is declared clean. But the bar itself is no longer inside the vault that reported it. "12 months ago, under a standard custodial yield agreement, that central bank leased 10 tons of its physical gold to a commercial bullion dealer in London to earn a fraction of a % in interest. The transaction required no physical movement. The bullion dealer immediately used those serial numbers to back a short-term liquidity facility, which was then chopped into derivative slices and pledged as collateral to an investment trust in Tokyo. The metal is completely dead, but its digital ghost is running an international marathon in the dark. The entire system relies on a single, silent assumption: the assumption of the unlifted weight. The network operates on the statistical probability that these three separate entities will never show up at the vault door at 2:30 a.m. on the same night and demand to put their physical hands on the same piece of metal. The value does not exist within the gold itself. The value is generated by the space between the physical asset and its digital copies. The software moves at the speed of light, generating yield, credit, and leverage across the globe, while the heavy yellow anchor rests in the dark, performing its vital institutional function by doing absolutely nothing. The transaction has cleared upstairs. The profits have been logged. The risk has been transferred. But the physical substance is still waiting for a human hand to move the lever of the pallet jack. And as long as that hand never arrives, the system can pretend that 1 bar is 3. The asset is stable. The vault confirms its presence. But its reality has been diluted into a multi-layered fiction. The confidence that sustains the skyscraper market is not based on the presence of the gold. It is based on the permanent calculation that no one will ever break the stillness of the shelf. A sovereign request for physical repatriation is submitted. The calendar records the passage of 5 years. 5 years. The auditor observes the timeline without exploring the motives of the Treasury. 5 years of calculated administrative processing, secure transport, and bureaucratic intervals to move a fraction of a nation's wealth from one metropolitan vault to another. It requires less than 8 hours for a cargo plane to fly between these international hubs. Yet the system required half a decade to execute the physical transfer. But the true mystery of the repatriation is not found in the timeline. It is found in the physical identity of the returns. We look at the delivery bay and ask, is it still the same gold? When the heavy wooden crates were finally unscrewed inside the highly secured receiving facilities, the gold that emerged was not the gold that had left decades ago. The German inspectors do not look at screens. They look at the physical matter. An auditor stands in the receiving bay, holding an archival inventory sheet from 1960. It is written in fountain pen ink that has faded to a dull brown, detailing the exact stamps of the pre-war mints, the specific assay marks. And the miner, historical dents left by European transport workers during the panic of the mid-century. He looks into the opened crate. The documentation in his hand is an exact record of the past. The matter in front of him is completely empty of it. The original bars did not return. The auditor observes the entries at the ledger. The serial numbers are new. The refinery markings are current. And the physical shape matches modern international delivery standards. The original bars, with their historical stamps and ancestral scratches, vanished into the custody cycle. What returns is clean, standardized. The newly cast bars cool slowly under the massive industrial vents. Rows of identical, mirror-like surfaces catch the flickering fluorescent light of the receiving bay. Look at the edges. They are sharp, unmarred by the scratches of transit or the dents of history. No refinery stamps from the older eras remain. The metal is steaming slightly as the cooling mist evaporates. The sound of the gold contracting as it loses its heat. Each sound is a small click of amnesia. No visible connection remains between the solid metal and the decades of complex financial history that came before it. The bars that sit on the shelves today are perfect rectangles of modern liquidity. They are entirely detached from the physical history that came before them. The auditor does not ask where the original metal traveled while it was held in foreign custody. We do not participate in the speculation of the trading floor. We provide no conclusions. We only observe the physical residue of the transition. The liquid gold does not preserve the memory of the ledger. It does not carry the stains of the contracts that claimed it while it sat in the dark. The furnace has washed away the material evidence of time. The debt is settled. The balance sheet is restored. The state has its tonnage, verified by weight and purity. But the identity of the asset has been completely reset. The system has performed an act of complete material amnesia, replacing an ancient, complex historical object with a pristine, anonymous unit of liquidity. The value returned, but the history stayed behind. A request enters the system, not a crisis, not a seizure, not a dispute. A routine, unpoliticized request. The asset owner, a fully verified institutional entity, wishes to exercise its legal title. It does not want to sell or lease or slice the gold into derivatives. It simply wishes to move its physical property from the custodian's column to its own truck. The request does not encounter a wall. It encounters a queue. The transaction is approved upstairs in less than a millisecond. The digital ledger logs the command. But as the order descends toward the concrete floor, the speed of light turns into the speed of paper. The request enters a department. The department enters a process. The gold remains where it is. An allocation notice must be generated. The custodian informs the owner that physical delivery requires a window, a specific, mathematically determined interval to isolate the specific bars from the unallocated pool of the vault. The pool is infinite, fluid, and instant. The specific bar is dense, heavy, and locked in space. The system does not deny the request. It schedules it. The owner is informed that the specialized secure transport lanes are booked for the next 11 weeks. The vault's outbound handling capacity is under a strict daily quota. Not because of an emergency, but because the physical infrastructure of a limestone vault buried 80 feet below a dense metropolitan city cannot accommodate more than a fixed number of tons per day. Every legal right must pass through a physical bottleneck. The queue becomes a department. The department becomes a compliance review. The compliance review becomes a logistical verification. The system does not say no. The system says, "We are processing your access." And while the order sits on line 42 of a terminal screen, the asset remains functioning on the clearing floor. It continues to secure credit lines. It continues to back liquidity facilities. It continues to stabilize the custodian's balance sheet. The owner possesses the title, but the custodian possesses the time. The system expands the interval between the intent and the touch. Discovering that if you can delay physical access indefinitely through the friction of the queue, you can enjoy all the institutional benefits of ownership without ever needing to own the metal. The ledger says it is yours. The steel says it stays. The auditor marks the difference. We live in an era that congratulates itself on its weightlessness. We are told that our wealth is personal, sovereign, and immediate. That because you can access your account from a device in your pocket while standing on a street corner at midnight. You have achieved complete autonomy over your life. We believe that ownership is a solid line connecting our identity to our property. But the old world continues to function in the dark, indifferent to our digital confidence. The vaults beneath the financial capitals continue to slide their wooden pallets across the concrete floor, matching the slow reality of the ground to the high-speed software upstairs. The processing shells inside alpine granite continue to melt down the sovereign identity of capital, turning wealth into an anonymous atomic secret. The monuments on the secure military planes continue to guard a frozen, unverified tomb. If digital connectivity can move trillions of dollars across the earth in the span of a single heartbeat, the retention of the central gold vault is not a technical delay. It is a deliberate, calculated bottleneck. The physical deadweight of the vault exists precisely to ensure that when the software layers fail, or when the political alignment shatters, the ultimate anchor of power cannot be moved by an emergency command line. The system does not fear your title. It does not fear your multi-billion-dollar entry on the IMF ledger. The system knows that as long as the physical matter remains trapped beneath 80 feet of foreign concrete, your sovereign power is entirely dependent on their administrative recognition. And here, at the final door, the lock reminds us of the ultimate rule of the depository architecture. Ownership survives on paper. Access survives on permission. And permission has always belonged to the system holding the key. There is no singular villain in this corridor. The clerk who rejects the documentation is not operating a grand conspiracy. The system is simply a machine designed to protect its own equilibrium. It operates by rules that were written long before you arrived, and it will continue to enforce those rules long after your name has been cleared from the screen. When the crisis arrives, when the electronic network stutters, when the diplomatic alliances fracture, or when the multiple claimants of bar number 8832 simultaneously arrive to ask for their weight, the system does not panic. It does not argue. It simply stops the movement. It turns to the text of the contract, points to the bureaucratic clause that separates the title from the delivery, and leaves the metal exactly where it has always been, in the dark, on the third shelf, perfectly still. The audit of the silent vaults is complete. The ledgers are closed. The balances are noted. Hold the heavy. Welcome to the Midnight Auditor. The archive remains open. Good night.